Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Enneagram Book Review. And we are going to be looking today at the Instinctual Drives and the Enneagram by John Luckovich. Look at that beautiful cover made by the author. So in case this is the first time we've met, my name is Heath. I am a Riso Hudson certified Enneagram teacher and author of Becoming Your True You, God, the Enneagram, and Your Unique Purpose. You can check that out in the link below. All right, so let's take a quick look at this book. I'm going to start off on page 265 with a really important quote that sets the stage for the whole purpose of this book. The instinctual drives are non-negotiable and crucial for our survival and personal fulfillment, but without inner efforts, physical needs override our need to deepen our consciousness. Our instinctual drives are products of the needs of the body, but they become confused with another order of need, an essential need to be. That is why this book is necessary. That is why we need to study the instinctual drives. They're that important. In fact, Russ Hudson, co-author of The Wisdom of the Enneagram and co-founder of the Enneagram Institute, says that your dominant instinct, that your life is a temple to your dominant instinct. That's how much the dominant instinct drives your life. And that's why they're called instinctual drives, not just instinctual suggestions or preferences. So the main instinctual drives, in case you're new to the Enneagram or not aware of this aspect of it, or of human psychology, is that the three instinctual main drives, and we have all three, are the social, sexual, and self-preservation drives. Everyone has one that is dominant, and then one that is their backup plan, sort of, and then the one that's sort of their blind spot, and that's called the instinctual stack. All right, so let's look again, or next rather, at the one page that I have dog-eared in this book. I mean, this book is covered with notes and stars and parentheses because I really loved this book, actually, and there are just a ton of notes that I made in it. But this is the one page that I dog-eared because it's so important. So I'm just going to read a few sentences from it. When we become identified with the instinctual drives, the powerful life force of the instincts no longer serves the well-being of the body and becomes infused into the ego, making the ego feel vital and substantial at the expense of the actual well-being of the body. Instinctual energy imbued into the ego makes identity issues seem like a matter of life and death. And it preoccupies us with an agenda that seems far more immediately urgent than contact with our own being. The independent I becomes lost and takes the agenda of the instinctual drives to be its own. Now, I know that's a mouthful. That's a lot of content to think about and digest, but that's just an example of the depth of this book. It's not an easy book. It's not a book that you can just breeze through in an hour or two. It's a book that you really have to chew on and think about. And like I said, make notes and underline and put stars by. So that's why this book is just, it's so important. It's so necessary to understand what's driving us, right? And the instincts, the very core things deep inside us that we have, for whatever reason, decided is most important, is the thing that's really steering the ship. And until we're aware of that, it's just going to keep doing its thing. And it can definitely lead to difficulties in your personal life and in your work life and in your relationships. So if you want to stop being asleep, as it were, as we say, for those who do the work, the inner work that's necessary for transformation, if you want to have transformation, if you want to find your authentic and true self, you need to deal with this stuff. Okay, so let's just take a quick look at the chapters. The first chapter is on the instinct. And the author, again, John Luckovich, he talks about instinctual needs, the self-preservation, sexual, social instincts. He breaks them all down. And then we have the next chapter on self-remembering. I love that term because we have a true self that we have forgotten. And part of this transformational work is coming back to our own selves that are actually already there. They're just buried under a lot of stuff. Okay, so he talks about the centers of intelligence and then what the Enneagram is and does. All right, so the third chapter, instinctual stacking, which is what I made reference to earlier. You have a dominant instinct, you have a blind spot, and you have one in the middle. And that's a gross oversimplification, so you'll understand that as you look through this chapter. The next chapter is on instinct, ego, and individuation. Super good chapter. I love this. There's some great charts that are very helpful in this chapter. He then goes on to talk about instinctual approaches and integrating the blind spot, right? Because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to integrate the part of us that we're ignoring, and we're trying to de-emphasize the part that we overemphasize so we can get balance in all of those areas. He talks about the essential Enneagram, meaning the essence of each one of the points on the Enneagram symbol. Then he talks about the Enneagram of Passions, and passion is another word for suffering. So the main point of suffering that each one of the types exemplifies and has to deal with the very most. For instance, as a point 7, I struggle with gluttony. And for me, it's gluttony of knowledge and information. So I have to be careful when I read books like this to not just read it and only partially digest it and then run to the next thing. I need to fully sit with it and digest it. Okay. So that's a thing I'm working on. All right. Then he talks about Enneagram type and instinct combinations. So what does an 8 look like with a dominant sexual instinct, with a dominant self-preservation instinct, with a dominant social instinct? Because the instinct really is sort of the first filter, and then that instinct gets sent into the secondary filter of your personality type. And so the instinct really has the greatest influence on how your particular type shows up in the world. So super important to understand that. Then he comes to a really lovely chapter on breath and sensation, and he talks about conscious breath, and he gives examples of different kinds of breath work that you can do, and he's done that for many years. And then the last chapter is really more kind of an aspirational chapter about why we do this work and why it's necessary. And that's a really great chapter as well. That's where the first quote that I read comes from in this video review. So, so then I'm going to read this bit from the end. The very end of the book. The ego must be humiliated over and over. That doesn't sound very pleasant, right? And it's not, but it's necessary. It must be seen as the nothingness it is, and we must be able to bear its nothingness. And that's hard because we've always been taught that we need to be individual, we need to be special, etc. We are already those things. It's the ego that's not, and that's why it must become nothing. We must learn to bear that. The true aim of inner work is to become humble, to become ordinary, to become nothing special. This allows us to sacrifice our self-involvement. I think this book belongs in the canon of Enneagram literature. It's deep, it's necessary, and it's important. You need to know this stuff, okay? Now, this is not the first Enneagram book that I would recommend because it is deep and intense, okay? So read an Enneagram book or two if you're new to the concept and to the model, and then go ahead and dig into this, because really the sooner you learn this information, the richer your journey is going to be and the deeper it's going to be sooner, right? Rather than spending several years trying to do other things. You focus on the instincts, which have really the most significant impact on how we show up in the world. Then you can work on other things, all right? So This is for people who want to grow. This is for people who understand that the Enneagram is not just about finding your number and planting a flag there, right? Your number's not who you are. It's where you got stuck. So this growth journey is greatly facilitated by books like this that help you really get down to the core of your being and what's going on there. All right. So my biggest takeaway from this book was remembering the breath. It's a thing that so helps me get grounded and to be present, which are two super important aspects of doing this work when you're waking up from having been asleep and having just automatically followed all these personality patterns that you have, right? So the other day I was in the grocery store and there was a pretty long line, and I thought, well, I could just, zone out. I could pull out my little addiction device, also known as a smartphone, and, scroll through social media, or I could breathe. So I just stood there and I breathed, and it felt amazing, and I felt alive, and the time went by very quickly because I wasn't trying to force anything to happen. So that's something that I'm really thankful to the author for reminding me about, and I hope that it is helpful to you as well. I hope that this video is helpful to you to tell you whether or not you might want to look into this book. There's a link to it below. There's also a link to my blog post about the book below that gets into a bit more detail and shares some additional quotes as well. So I hope that if this was interesting to you, and if you want to hear more about Enneagram books and the Enneagram as a tool for spiritual transformation, that you will subscribe below, and I'll see you next time.